In this video, we're going to look at the basics and introduction of CSS, kind of the setup and how it works and how we use it in creating web pages. So we're going to jump right on into it. So first off, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets or sheet. That's not super important that you know it, but it is useful just to kind of have that in the back of your brain. And it'll change the appearance and style of a web page. So if we're using CSS, we're using this type of code, it's all meant to change how something shows up or how something appears on the website. CSS code is made up of a couple main parts. First is the selector, and this chooses what is affected. So it tells the web browser, here's what I want you to change. The property tells you what about the selector, what about those things to change. And finally, the value says how to change the property of the selector. So this is easier to kind of make sense of if we look at an example here. So this is a bit of CSS code. This P right here is the selector. So you can see that it's applying to all HTML elements with P. So this is going to apply to all the paragraphs, all the text basically. This right here and this right here, these are our properties. So you can see how these choose two different things. So one is saying change the color, the other is changing the font size. So those are two properties. And then lastly, we've got our values. And this says what to actually change those to. So in the case of color, we want to change it to red. In the case of font size, we want to change it to 20 pixels. And that's a size, right? So 1 pixel would just be a dot, 20 pixels will be 20 dots high. If you're familiar with that, if you have questions, ask. Otherwise, I'll leave that kind of as is. So if we want to talk about actually using CSS, there's a couple ways that we can include this in our code. So the first is if we have a style sheet. This is where we write all of our CSS in a separate section. All of our CSS code goes by itself, and that's in a style sheet. There's two types of style sheets we'll talk about. First is an internal style sheet, and this is where at the top of your HTML you'll have a section that'll say style, and then it will close with style. And then you'll have a bunch of CSS in here, but it's in the same .html file. You can also have external style sheets where it's an entirely separate file. And generally for this class, we'll work with external file sheets. There is also another option that you would have seen once or twice before, and that's inline. And you can put your CSS directly next to the HTML elements they modify, but generally for this class we're going to want to avoid that because we want to have consistency, and generally speaking externals can be the best because it allows us to easily modify and adjust and see everything kind of separately. If you do have an external style sheet, they need to be linked to the web page in the header. So somewhere in your header, you're going to have something that looks basically like this. So it's going to say link, because we're defining a link, href, because we need to define what we're linking to. Then you'll put your, whatever the name of your style sheet is, and where that can be found. And then you're going to say this rel for what is it or why are we linking to it, and that you're going to call style sheet. So this is just like when we have doctype HTML We always put things in the header. This will just kind of be a pretty standard thing you end up using, but what you'll notice is it's not an A, it's a link, and that means that we're just establishing a connection between the two files. We're not actually creating a hyperlink, so you're not going to be able to click on something on the page. We're just connecting them and saying, hey, look for this style.css and pull, because it's a style sheet, pull all of your information from there. So that's the basics of kind of CSS, how we set it up, what it is, and how we use it. And so you should be able to jump into the next couple activities here.